You pack your bag, book a ticket, and tell your friends you're off to see the world. Golden temples, street food, freedom. It's the trip of a lifetime, and for a 23-year-old British backpacker named Christy Jones, Thailand was exactly that. A final adventure before returning home. But just days after checking into a cozy guest house in Chiang Mai, Christy would be found dead in her hotel room, and the truth behind what happened that night would haunt her family for decades. Because sometimes, paradise hides something darker. This is a story about a young woman who chased her dreams across the world. A story about a family that never stopped fighting for answers. And a mystery that would take nearly 2 decades to begin to unravel, and even then would leave more questions than solutions. It was September 2000. Chiang Mai, northern Thailand. A city alive with backpackers chasing cheap hostels, jungle treks, and spiritual awakenings. At that time, Chiang Mai was becoming a pilgrimage site for young travelers from across Europe and beyond. The streets were lined with ghost houses offering rooms for just a few dollars a night. Markets overflowed with street vendors selling pad thai and fresh mango. And everywhere you looked, you'd see groups of 20-somethings planning their next jungle adventure or recovering from their last one. It was paradise for people like Christy. Christy had been traveling through Asia for several weeks by this point. Bright, friendly, free-spirited. She called home often, always sounding happy. Her photographs showed her smiling in front of temples, sharing meals with other travelers, exploring markets she'd never seen before. Her friends said she loved meeting new people. She trusted easily. She was that kind of traveler, the kind who believed in the goodness of people, who would chat with strangers in hostels, who saw travel as a way to connect with humanity rather than just collect passport stamps. Back home in Wales, her family was proud of her. Her mother, Pam Jones, had encouraged her to go. She wanted Christy to experience the world while she was young, to have adventures, to live fully. There was no sense that this trip would be anything other than transformative and joyful. Christy had plans. She was going to work, save money, and travel the world before settling into adult life. This wasn't reckless wandering. It was a carefully considered gap year, a moment to find herself before the responsibilities of home took hold. On September 13, 2000, Christy booked a room at the Airy Guest House, a modest little hotel popular with tourists. The guest house was nothing fancy, just one of hundreds of similar places scattered throughout Chiang Mai. But it was clean, affordable, and well-reviewed by other backpackers online. She settled into her room and told friends she'd catch a bus the next morning to her next destination. She sounded fine on the phone that night, excited about what was coming next, already planning her route through Thailand. She said she'd call home soon, but when she didn't show up and didn't call home, people started to worry. First, it was just a missed connection. Maybe she'd decided to stay longer in Chiang Mai. Maybe she'd met someone and extended her trip. These things happen to travelers all the time. But as hours turned into a day, and a day turned into more silence, the worry deepened. The next day, September 14th, a housekeeper knocked on Christy's door. No answer. The room was locked from the inside. At first, they thought she might be sleeping, jet lag maybe, too much exploring, too much heat. But as the morning wore on and still no one emerged, the staff grew concerned. They had protocols for this. It wasn't the first time a guest had slept late or locked themselves in their room. But something felt wrong. When the staff used their master key to open the door, what they saw would change everything. Christy was lying on the bed, motionless. There were signs of a struggle in the room. Her belongings were scattered. Her camera was still there. Her diary, her clothes, all still there. Evidence of a life suddenly interrupted. Her passport was missing, and so was her killer. The staff called police immediately. Within hours, The small, quiet guest house had been transformed into a crime scene. Thai police quickly ruled it a murder. The initial examination suggested sexual assault. There were injuries consistent with violence. The room showed signs of struggle. Furniture moved, items displaced. But the case grew complicated almost immediately. There were no witnesses. No one had heard anything unusual that night. No security footage because the airy guest house, like many small ghost houses in Chiang Mai, didn't have cameras. Evidence of possible sexual assault was present, but collecting it was problematic. This was 2000 in Thailand. Forensic capabilities were limited compared to Western standards. Samples were collected, yes, but they were stored improperly, contaminated, or preserved in ways that would later make them difficult to work with. The investigation hit wall after wall. Police questioned staff at the guest house. They interviewed other guests who had been staying there. They checked with local bars and restaurants to see if anyone had seen Christy with a man that night. But there were no clear leads. No one came forward with information. No obvious suspect emerged. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew colder. Local Thai authorities did what they could, but resources were stretched thin. In 2000, a case involving a foreign tourist wasn't necessarily prioritized the way it might be in a Western country. There were other crimes, other cases, other demands on the police's time. And then, as fast as it had started, the investigation stalled. The file wasn't closed, it was simply shelved. Another unsolved case in a country where unsolved cases were common. Back home in Wales, Christy's family didn't have the luxury of moving on. Her mother, Pam Jones, spent years writing letters to Thai authorities, begging them not to forget her daughter. She wrote to the British Embassy. She wrote to government officials. She wrote to anyone she thought might have the power to keep Christy's case alive. The letters were polite but desperate. Each one a small plea for justice from a woman who had lost her daughter in the most terrible way imaginable. Pam made the journey to Thailand herself. She walked the streets of Chiang Mai that her daughter had walked. She visited the airy guest house, the place where Christy's life had ended so violently. She stood in that room and tried to understand what had happened. She said she could feel Christy's presence there, and the unbearable weight of not knowing. Not knowing is perhaps the cruelest part of losing someone to violence. You don't get closure. You don't get answers. You just have questions that circle endlessly in your mind. What was her last moment like? Did she suffer? Was she afraid? Who did this? Every anniversary of Christy's death, Pam spoke to the press, pleading for information. She posted photographs of her daughter. She kept Christy's memory alive publicly, refusing to let the world forget. Every year, new appeals were made. Every year, the silence grew heavier. The British press occasionally picked up the story. A young British woman murdered abroad. It was the kind of tragedy that drew media attention. There were articles, documentaries, international appeals for information. But international attention doesn't always translate to justice, especially in cases involving a foreigner who has been dead for months or years, investigated in a jurisdiction with different resources and priorities than the victim's home country. Christy's case became what many unsolved murders become. A tragedy that fades from the headlines, that people forget about, that becomes just another sad story in a world full of sad stories. But Pam never forgot. The family never forgot. And buried in evidence lockers in Thailand, preserved in ways that modern forensic science could work with, was a key that had been waiting all along. A tiny DNA sample, preserved from Christy's body. A biological fingerprint that belonged to someone, to whoever had been in that room with Christy on the night she died. Nearly 20 years passed. It was now 2018. Chiang Mai had changed significantly. The backpacker trails had become more established, more popular, more commercialized. What had once been an exotic destination for adventurous travelers was now a well-worn tourist route, documented in guidebooks and Instagram posts. But for Christie's family, time had moved at a different pace. For them, it was still 2000. It was still the day they got the call. It was still the shock, the disbelief, the endless ache of loss. Then, unexpectedly, Thai investigators decided to reopen the file. Perhaps it was a new directive from local authorities to revisit old, unsolved cases. Perhaps it was a change in leadership at the police department. Someone new who was determined to bring closure to these old mysteries. Or perhaps it was simply that enough time had passed that someone decided it was worth trying again. Forensic technology had evolved dramatically in the nearly 2 decades since Christie's death. What had been impossible in 2000 was now routine. DNA testing, which had been in its relative infancy in Thailand in 2000, was now sophisticated and reliable. They retested the old evidence, the samples that had been preserved, the biological material that had been collected from Christie's body. And what came back was astonishing. A foreign male DNA profile. Someone had left behind a genetic fingerprint, a biological record of their presence in that room. One that didn't match any tourist or staff member known to Christie. One that didn't match any of the men who had been previously questioned. At last, there was proof, scientific, irrefutable proof, that someone specific had been inside that room. For Pam Jones, this was the first real hope she'd had in nearly 2 decades. The DNA wasn't just evidence. It was a direction. It was momentum. It meant that Christie's case might actually be solved. It meant that someone might finally be held responsible. It meant that her daughter's death wasn't just an open question anymore. It was a mystery that could potentially be cracked. Rumors spread about who the killer might be. Was it another traveler? Someone passing through Chiang Mai whom Christie had met in a hostel or a bar? Was it a hotel employee? Someone with access to rooms someone trusted? Was it someone who followed her from a bar? A stranger who targeted her? Police eventually questioned several suspects, including men who had worked at the guest house around the time of Christie's death. They used the DNA evidence to narrow the field of possibilities. They conducted interviews, followed leads, pursued theories. But even with DNA in hand, justice moved slowly. Very slowly. There were legal complications. International law enforcement protocols. The difficulty of prosecuting a case where the primary evidence was nearly 2 decades old. Questions about chain of custody for the samples. Questions about whether evidence gathered in 2000 would hold up in court by 2018. There were also bureaucratic tangles, the kind of red tape and confusion that comes when a case involves multiple countries, multiple legal systems, and the passage of nearly 2 decades. Months turned into more months. Years turned into more years. To this day, the case remains technically unsolved, though investigators believe they know who did it. The DNA evidence points in a direction. The investigation has narrowed the possibilities significantly. But without a conviction, without an arrest, without someone being held accountable in a court of law, it remains incomplete. It remains a mystery with a suspect but no closure. Christie Jones was 23 years old when she died. She went to Thailand for beauty, for freedom, for life. She wanted to see temples and taste exotic food and meet people from around the world. She wanted to write in her diary about her adventures. She wanted to call home and tell her mother about the incredible things she'd seen. She never imagined her name would become a symbol, a reminder to every traveler that the world, as breathtaking as it is, can also be cruel. In the decades since her death, her story has been told and retold. It appears in true crime documentaries. It's discussed in travel safety forums. It's cited in articles about dangers facing solo female travelers. Christie became a cautionary tale, not because she did anything wrong, but because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time and encountered someone evil. But Christie was more than a cautionary tale. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had dreams and hopes and plans. She had a laugh, a sense of humor, a curiosity about the world. Her mother, Pam Jones, still keeps her photographs on the wall. Her smile frozen in time, that of a young woman who just wanted to see the world, who believed that adventure was worth the risk, who trusted people, who saw the good in the world. Christie's case has changed things, at least incrementally. Travel guides now emphasize solo traveler safety. Hostels and guest houses have become more security conscious, installing cameras and better locks. Young women backpacking through Southeast Asia today are more cautious, more aware, more careful. Not fearful but aware. The memories of Christie Jones have helped protect others, even if they couldn't protect her. Her family has shown extraordinary grace and strength. Rather than becoming consumed by bitterness or anger at the failure of justice systems to provide closure, they've channeled their grief into remembrance and advocacy. Pam Jones continues to speak about her daughter. She continues to pursue answers. She continues to honor Christie's memory by refusing to let the world forget. Because sometimes, it's not the wilderness that's dangerous. It's not the unfamiliar cultures or the exotic diseases or the remote landscapes. It's not the risks that travelers plan for and prepare for. It's what's waiting behind a locked hotel door. It's the random violence that can strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. It's the cruelty that exists in the world, hidden behind smiles and casual conversation. And it's why families like the Joneses never stop fighting. Why they never stop asking for justice. Why they never stop telling Christie's story. Because to stop would be to let her be forgotten. And Christie Jones will not be forgotten.